resource extraction tends to be a messy business. I mean, by virtue of being an energy superpower, are we, making ourselves more vulnerable as a nation that also denigrates our environment, John?
Yes, there's no way around that. It would be very nice if we could just sort of scoop up the oil and put it in a rail car and send it somewhere, but it doesn't work that way. We have to have drilling rigs offshore with dangers of oil spills and environmental disasters like we had in the Gulf of Mexico. The tar sands, as it's called by its critics, the oil sands by those who like it in Alberta, is a very messy, environmentally difficult way to get oil out of the ground. The fact is, though, we have to do it. There's no other way for us to power our industries. There's no other way to turn on the lights. There's no other way to keep the cars running, and there won't be for a very long time. So for Canadians, the question is mitigation, which is how do we get the greatest possible amount of oil out of the ground, of minerals out of the ground? How do we cut down the forests for wood for our houses while doing the least amount of damage possible?
Well,
we are, in that sense, a nation of compromisers.
I want to ask Scott that exact question, because in one of our earlier segments we talked about proper role of government. I mean, what is the role of government vis-a-vis energy industry that might do damage to the environment?
Let's start with the premise that we need these resource industries to be successful and prosperous. So then, in my view, the role of government is to make them do it in a way that is benign as possible. And you have to make them do it. And this is where people will come to different points of view in terms of the role of government. I think that history has taught us that unless government makes industry do certain things, then it won't. So I think government has to take a strong role in terms of regulation. But this is the real tough part. Right? We're not an island. So if we impose those regulatory burdens and we make people do that, that's fine. That applies to everybody in Canada. But then they'll say, well, then I'll just go elsewhere. So there's got to be a commitment to some kind of multilateral, to a bunch of modern developed economies trying to work together and say, look, we got to come to a common view as to how to regulate. The NDP hate that because they say, oh, well, then that sounds like we're giving away our right to regulate to others. But then the Conservatives dislike it because they say, well, now we're hamstringing our industry in terms of letting them develop. But I think we got to work with other like-minded, like-sized economies and try to find not just a common policy in terms of resource extraction, but in terms of regulation of it.
When you're looking at resource extraction, does it make sense to cut down trees, put them in a tanker, and ship them to China? For them to be processed, developed, and created into little wooden toys in China, and then shipped back to Canada to be purchased? No. Does it make sense to pull bitumen out of the ground and ship it raw to Texas when we could refine those resources here in Canada, create those jobs within our nation? I would choose, you might choose differently, but I would choose to create those jobs in Canada, to develop those resources sustainably, where we do make the polluter pay, so we don't leave a debt of an environmental disastrous legacy to future generations. Everyone believes in polluter pay. You want to also make sure that the jobs are developed here. How? Well, let me tell you, my grandfather worked in a petro refinery in Montreal a few years ago. You know what? That refinery is now closed.
But
we're speaking. We could be refining that bitumen here in Canada.
But we're speaking to our better morals here, because here's the reality in Canada, sadly, politically. The Canadians seem to have voted thus far, maybe this generation will be different, about paychecks before they vote about green spaces. We do all ideally want, our Walden Pond, if you will, where we have a perfect, pristine environment. We have not yet found a way to politically connect, or parties haven't, in such a manner with the Canadian public to say we want a more advanced green agenda. So right now it's all claptrap.